We have males, then we have females, and then we have others, and then we have politicians. Now, politicians actually, they want to be more special than every other group. And the reason why is because they ask to have rights that the other fellow people do not have. They have the right to put something on a fancy piece of paper and somehow make an immoral act into a moral act. Well, what gives them that power? The fact that they're a politician, the fact that they have some suit and tie, the fact that they have some title, but that's not a natural right. It's a right that we created and said, well, this is the right. You have the right to rule. You have the right to be a politician and the right to issue commands and the right to give other people's rights. I mean, this is very interesting, but this is a very special group of human beings that, if anything, will use the social and cultural norms, that is talking about male, female, or the other category, for their own agendas. So the politicians are actually even proclaiming to be more special, while claiming that they are somewhat like you, so they can get you on their side. How hypocritical. You know, we say there are these stereotypes that people are using to be special or act in certain ways, but here you have politicians who are acting and speaking wanting to either convince or deceive people. And you have to question whether they're convincing or they're deceiving. Are they being honest? Are they being themselves? Or are they trying to fulfill some sort of identity and trying to be somewhat special, trying to act like the victim, but also saying, well, I've accomplished this and I've accomplished that, trying to sound like the hero? What's going on here? You got this hero ego complex, and then you got this victim complex, and we see it in politicians. We don't see it necessarily in other groups. It may be present in other groups, but then we don't criticize the politicians. We don't look at what we're doing in politics. You know, we have all this talk about change, and all these politicians are like, we need to change things, and they appeal to people, but they will do whatever it takes to appeal to people, right? Whatever sounds good, whatever looks good. So they have their fancy suits and ties, they have their mannerisms, they even will teach themselves, how do I talk to people? How can I convince them? Right? But am I being myself? Am I being a natural leader and influencing others to be the change themselves, showing by example rather than bragging about all my accomplishments and then crying for help, begging for donations and begging for people to support the political campaign? See, it's all about morality, which is something a lot of people don't look at. When it comes to racism or sexism and all these things, it all comes down to morality, and the same thing for politicians. When they put something on a piece of paper, it somehow is seen by everybody as moral, even though it simply means legal, and legality does not always equal morality. They're two separate things, but people often equate the two. Oh, well, I can't do this because it's against the law. Well, is it against right and wrong? You know, in the case of World War II, where you have mass democide, this number one cause of unnatural death of a bunch of soldiers rushing to war, I'm going to carry out the orders of this leader that I presume is my leader, and maybe I voted them in, or maybe the majority voted them in, and maybe I don't even want them in, but they're there, and they told me to do it, therefore I must do it. They feel like they should suppress their conscience and not think for themselves what is right and wrong or act on that. They think they should simply follow out the orders that were simply given to them. So they convince themselves they're a mental slave, the worst form of slavery, as I detail in my book. And that type of slavery inevitably leads to physical slavery, because if the slave is willing to comply with the giver, the order giver's commands, then the order giver can eventually do anything they want to the order follower, because they have their way. No one was there holding them accountable. No one was stopping them in their tracks. So when we don't criticize politicians and we don't realize that they're trying to be special, well, what are we creating for ourselves? A world where they get to be special and have rights over others. And then we wonder why we're losing our rights. And then we wonder why we don't have freedoms. We can't even define what a right is. We don't even know what freedom is. We can't even compare it to slavery. We don't even know what slavery is, not just chattel slavery, which was from the 1800s. And again, all that ties into morality. It doesn't tie into left versus right or this race or that sex. It's all about morality. And while males, females, and these other groups are just debating about topics, we want to see, well, oh, you're wrong on this, you're wrong on that. Oh, I think there's only two genders. Oh, I think there's more than two genders. No one's imposing their will on others by violence. But you know who is? The politicians. The people who have the ability to scribble on a fancy piece of paper and say, this is actually morality. This needs to be enforced by everybody. And if it doesn't, if you don't, and if you don't comply, well then, punishments to you. And doesn't that make you a slave, doing something against your own will? Being in a system you did not voluntarily choose to be in. And so this is the question we have, but we always defer from this and we go to other debates. I knew that by talking about this subject and mentioning, male versus female versus other groups, it would bring people perhaps to this video, but that shouldn't be the case, should it? What if I were to talk about morality? How many people are going to watch that video? Probably not many people. And maybe even just the fact I mentioned politicians, people clicked right off the video because they knew it wasn't about what they wanted to hear and what they wanted to be true. But just because you want something to be true does not mean it is true. Just because, again, you write something on a piece of paper does not make it real or exist in reality. It's on a piece of paper. Right? These people are just people. They're like you and I. Are we equal? Are we not? Well, why would we make these people unequal from us by giving them more rights that other people can't do? Allowing them to do violence for this scenario or that scenario, for a healthcare program, for this benefit, for that benefit, for the greater good of society, justifying the individual getting violated, their rights being violated for the greater good, the collectivism. Is that the way you want to live your life? Where the individual is violated for the collective? Well, how would you like it if your rights were being violated for the collective? See, the point is that nobody's rights should be violated. Violence is wrong to begin with. That's where the word violate comes from here. Violence and violation. To harm someone, to do violence upon them is to breach upon their rights. Because to do right is not to do wrong, and to do violence is to do wrong. And to do violence is akin to also doing slavery because you're putting someone under the condition they did not want to be in themselves. Okay, so again, people don't talk about this. They don't even know about it. And in politics, you'll see they never talk about morality, yet every single law is backed by violence. Right? And so I feel bad for those who participate in politics, those who are right-leaning or left-leaning, because I was one of you. I was playing that game, and my friend Sterling was right. He said, humans like games. It's not that they like politics. It's not even that they like war. They like games because it's entertaining, it's fun to them. You know what? To be even more specific, human beings like sports games, right? Because politics is a lot like a sports game. If you say, here's Team A and Team B, or Team Red and Team Blue, and look, they're fighting each other. Oh, I want this team to win. And oh, this is my player. I voted for him. I put my money into him, perhaps, and you're essentially gambling and you're hoping that a certain result comes from it. And you're just sitting there watching on the sidelines, hoping that something will happen. Except this is the real world, and it's sad that people treat it like it's a game. And that's not to say we shouldn't have fun or shouldn't play games. It's to say we shouldn't play games with other people, doing violence upon them. Do you really think slavery or violence is necessary for getting together, for actually creating change in this world? If so, I want you to be blunt and honest with me. Yes, I want violence to be done against someone for this rule to be imposed upon the masses. I want this law to be passed, and therefore I want violence in this scenario. The least you can do is be honest and don't cover it with words and deceit. Like people say, this is taxation. No, it's just theft, because the action is taking something that does not belong to you. That's what it is. And if you defer anywhere from that, guess what? You're not being honest, and you're not being truthful. Okay, so whether you realize it or not, you're not being truthful, you're not being honest. Okay, because in reality, what you earn is yours. It's your property. Who you are, that is you. I breathe for me, you breathe for you. This is how we get our concept of rights. It's based in truth. Morality based in truth. That's why what is moral is also what is correct. I can't claim to own you because that's wrong. I don't own you. and that's therefore immoral. I shouldn't ever do that, and that's why it doesn't work. And that's why it doesn't work to have systems that inherently violate individual rights. And again, people want to talk about male or female or sexism, and it gets all the traction online, but yet nobody is looking at the people who are pulling the strings and pulling often both sides of the coin. This is called the Hegelian dialectic. If you don't know what the Hegelian dialectic is, you have a thesis and an antithesis, and they form a synthesis, otherwise known as problem reacts solution. You create a problem in the masses, and then you create a solution. Say, here's a solution, and then you create a whole new world based off of that, right? You control the narrative, essentially, and you're putting two sides against each other on purpose. And we see this throughout history. People will be funding both sides of the war, and you're saying, well, why would people do that? Maybe it's to steer a certain narrative, right? And so there's a higher truth, and the reality is that people have yet to see it. People in politics, whether they're right-wing or left-wing. Like I said, I was right-wing myself, and if you are of any of these wings, I encourage you to look at the whole bird and realize, wow, I'm not that bird. I'm a human being who has the capability of reasoning, of conscience, and so do you. And we simply need to strengthen that. And with that moral education, we can be free, because in order for the slave to free themselves to begin with, you have to have sovereignty. You have to have self-control. So if you're not teaching that and actively creating that, can you ever expect to be free? Because freedom comes externally as the result of our internal change, internal transformations. Okay, so that is a process, and that process requires education, which does not sound like politics to me. And if you're using politics for an educative platform, then you're probably not voting for yourself. You're not asking for money. You're not putting your name all over posters trying to fit a certain identity, trying to be someone special. Right? And so there's a quote, I think it's by Henry David Thoreau, and it's that there's thousands, striking at the branches of evil, but only a few striking at the root. And I think that is what really gets to the heart of all racial, sexual issues and all politics, really. Because there's tons of people playing these games, not realizing there's something deeper beyond that. And a good place to start to learn a lot of this knowledge is Larkin Rose or Mark Passio, for a lot of you who haven't looked into this, because once you do, you find out it's really powerful. I'm even getting testimonies on my channel. You'll see there's people who are ex-statists. Statism is this belief in politics as a means for change, in using politics to do anything in this world, essentially, having an authority in somebody else. Like, does anybody naturally have an authority over another human being? These are the questions you have to ask yourself. And is that moral? Do they have that moral right? Right? And so I'm going to put some questions on the screen, and you can sort of answer that for yourself. It'll also define what statism is for you if you're really curious. But I also look at this through the lens of slavery, and it helps me understand it as well, like I said. But we get caught up, like I said, in these social and cultural issues. Let's just not forget the root to these issues. And that would be morality. And that would be these people who are using it for agendas, and therefore they want it on the spotlight, and they want people talking about it, especially if it also serves as a distraction away from more important matters. So it's important that we really look at our priorities here. And politicians, well, they claim to be special. They have these changes, right? We always talk about, transgenders, and they're changing from this or that. I mean, here's politicians changing all the time. Here's politicians claiming to be special, begging for change, begging for you to do something for them, and then bragging and saying that they deserve more and that they've done this and done that. Sounds an awful lot like the sexism talks that I always hear about, of male versus female or transgenderism and that whole debate. So let's not forget about the politicians. Thank you very much for watching. Corey Engelot, Nature is the Answer.